In May 1991, Ethiopia was collapsing into civil war. Rebel forces were rapidly advancing on the capital, and a community of 14,000 Ethiopian Jews found themselves trapped in a collapsing state. Israel's extraction plan pushed the limits of aviation. In 36 hours, 40 flights pulled the entire population out. They stripped their transport planes, laying down foam mattresses so passengers could sit on the floor. A single 747 set a world record, carrying 1,087 passengers. This required intense diplomatic leverage behind the scenes. The United States stepped in, using economic aid as a bargaining chip with the desperate Ethiopian government to secure the necessary airspace and ensure safe passage to the runways. When the dust settled, Operation Solomon was hailed as an absolute triumph. It was viewed as a modern-day exodus, executed by a state operating with incredible mechanical and logistical precision. The human center of this story focused on the flights themselves. Amidst the chaos, 8 babies were born mid-flight on the floors of military transport planes. They instantly became global media symbols for the rescue mission. News cameras captured the euphoric arrivals. Exhausted doctors carried the newborns off the aircraft, while the parents stepped onto the tarmac in traditional clothing, carrying woven baskets and whatever they had on their backs. Fast forward 20 years. Those infants are now full-grown adults, carrying a highly unusual and permanent bureaucratic marker in their lives. If you look at their official ID cards, the location listed under country of birth isn't a city or a hospital. It reads literally, "on the way to Israel." Today, these famous plane babies are defined by grinding poverty, rampant military desertion, and deep disillusionment. By 2011, the children of Operation Solomon are largely living in underdeveloped, highly segregated neighborhoods.
The mythos of their miraculous arrival is completely detached from their daily reality. The fracture started the moment they left the airport. Instead of integrating these traumatized refugees into established cities, the state funneled them into isolated absorption centers and temporary caravan parks. Even the state-run integration programs were rigidly inflexible. At the Ulpan language schools designed to teach Hebrew, mothers of the famous plane babies were turned away and locked out of classes simply because their infants were crying and disrupting the lessons. Missing that one-time educational window had permanent consequences. 2 decades later, many of those parents still cannot speak conversational Hebrew. They remain locked out of the modern workforce and entirely dependent on government stipends. This inverted the entire family structure. Young children who picked up the language in school had to become the primary navigators for their parents, managing bank accounts, translating at their own parent-teacher conferences, and carrying the household's bureaucratic weight. That burden quickly turned economic. To keep their families afloat, many of these kids ended up dropping out of high school, taking demanding shifts at chicken processing plants and factory assembly lines just to bring home a paycheck. This creates a sharp contradiction when they reach conscription age. The children famously born into the arms of soldiers during the Airlift are now serving in the IDF themselves, but an alarming number of them go AWOL. They aren't abandoning their posts out of political protest. It is a matter of pure economic survival. The basic military salary isn't enough to feed their younger siblings, so they desert their units to work off-the-books construction and painting jobs. The painful irony is that the very military apparatus that celebrated their births at 30,000 feet is now sentencing them to 21-day confinements in military prisons on the ground. The national ideals of the rescue simply do not align with the economic reality of the rescued. The struggles of the plane babies point to a structural failure, not a personal one. The outcomes of this generation rest squarely on the state's flawed absorption policies. This animated timeline chart visualizes government resources dedicated to the immigrants. You see a massive, towering spike in money and coordination isolated entirely in a 36-hour window in 1991. After that, it immediately drops to a flat line of neglect over the next 20 years. You can clearly see that neglect in where they live. Several of these plane babies currently reside in an underdeveloped, heavily segregated block in the city of Hadera. The neighborhood is ironically named Pe'er, which translates to splendor. Operation Solomon proved that a government can move 14,000 bodies across a border in a weekend, but treating the moment the landing gear touched the tarmac as the end of the mission was a mistake.
True rescue requires the unglamorous, decades-long commitment to building a society the refugees can actually survive in.